Well, this is also very interesting to me as it is to you, maybe. Because even I'm reading this for the first time. And the title says for itself how Levels.fyi scale to millions of the user with Google Sheet as a backend. Yeah, Google Sheet. So I'm very excited to jump into this and understand, would it be compliant with ACID, would it be base compliant, or I'm not sure how the concurrency would be handled within this, or what sort of data are they storing. Does it have any relation? Is it just a key value? So bunch of questions. Let's see, can we get it answered within this. So Dushyant has written this article on, I'm pretty late to this, okay. Update, while we continue to use Google Sheet throughout our operations, we now also rely on PostgreSQL. Okay. Now I see. I do understand Google Sheet has its own pros and cons, but they do rely on Postgres. They have not migrated. This is also one thing that we need to understand. So let's see. Levels.fyi has become the career site for professionals. Our users today span the entire globe, and as of now, roughly 1 to 2 million unique users visit the site every month. That's true. Even sometimes I go ahead with Levels.fyi to understand what is the hierarchy, what is the comparison, what band they are providing. We started back in 2017. Oh, it's that old. Okay. With a humble vision of helping professionals get paid, not played. Nice one. And within a couple of years, the site became a primary resource for US tech professionals looking for job salaries and to get negotiation help. But what if I told you that the initial vision of the site did not have a backend? It seems, okay, the initial version, version. So the initial version did not have the backend. This is something I need to check upon. How did they went ahead then? Was it all client side, or don't have backend as a backend database? It seems like a pretty counterintuitive idea for a site with our traffic volume to not have a backend or any fancy infrastructure. But our philosophy to build products has always been start simple and iterate. This by far is the best advice one can give. I too subscribe for this, and I'm so sorry that it came late into my life. Maybe if it had came earlier, then I would be at a much higher level right now. But yeah, I'm satisfied. So since I'm following this, I am sure that it's not going to fail. This allows us to move fast and focus on what's important. That's so true. So globally distributed multi-master clouds SQL database powering 1000 monthly users versus Levels.fyi using Google Sheet as a database. This is so nice. In case you're wondering, this is Olympics 2024 Paris Olympics photo. Yeah. Why did we start without a backend? To focus more on a product idea. Good. Google Forms plus Google Sheet allowed. Forms is one case where they're using Forms. Okay, allowed us to move fast in realizing the initial version, save effort and money on setting up API and database servers on AWS. This is a huge win, especially when any cloud provider takes entire of your money. I do remember some of the projects, they don't have any of the customer, but still they are paying AWS bills. So the dev team's size is greater than their customer base. So that's cool. So again, last point is save effort on operational maintenance of an API and a database server. This is so true. You remember there are DB admins to do such kind of stuffs, but I'm still questioning upon the functionality. Is it functionally compliant? Levels.fyi had a Google Sheet as a DB for a while. Oh, what's wrong with this? I don't want it to open this one. And it was great. Some cool things about it: a quick interface, yeah. Built-in auth permission, yes. General familiarity, yeah, that's so true. Everyone is familiar with SQL, as Excel, not SQL. So sheet database.txt. Let's be honest, txt is too wild. Throughout this blog post, we will be sharing our strategy and learning on building a dynamic site without a database and an API server. We hope this helps you bootstrap products and ideas faster as well. Static versus dynamic site. Whenever someone thinks about building a dynamic site, the first cause of mental fatigue is the backend. The backend is responsible for processing, storing, and delivering the dynamic content. If we take the backend for any site out of equation, then it mainly is a static site. That is true to a good extent. Because dynamism comes from the backend itself, and till that moment, it is a static site. Building a static site is not super challenging because you don't have to think about maintaining a server for APIs and database for data storage. To build a static site, you only need the left part, and the dynamic requires the right part. So left is CDN, file store. Okay, CDN is for better optimization. Okay, nice. And API server, and you have a database. That's so true. The API server is the one who is responsible to connect you with your friend in a gaming server, and hence your friend makes an activity and it is shown to you. That's how API server is responsible, and where did the action went, how did he moved, is dependent on the database. Again, it's not a one-to-one thing. Many things come into picture. There may be cache, there may be any other sort of, design principles while designing this approach. So let's see their approach. Our secret sauce to do away with the database and the server consisted mainly of Google Forms, Google Sheet, AWS Lambda, AWS API Gateway. Interesting. It may also be worth mentioning that you could start without any AWS stuff. That's just that. Loading from a Google Sheet directly has longer latency and isn't performant. That is so true. I wonder, but I didn't have practically implemented. I tried it out few stuffs with Google App Script. I'm not sure how the benchmarks are with App Script and the bare metal calls with Google Sheet APIs. That would be a good comparison. So let's get further. The user interface can be replaced with Google Forms, the database can be replaced with a Google Sheet, and the API server can be replaced by AWS API Gateway plus Lambda. That is so true. API server can have API Gateway plus AWS Lambda mainly for computing, I guess. Let him cook. Google Forms, Google Sheet, and Google API Gateway are no-code tools. Okay, they are required zero amount of operational maintenance. I doubt they don't require zero operational maintenance. It is near to zero, but not zero. It's Google's and AWS job to keep them up and running. That is so true. That is the reason why serverless are booming. Right flow. Example. Let's take an example. User adds a new salary on his site. So version 0, V0 had a no UI. Okay. Add a salary form was a Google form UI. Okay. So let me take this. Okay. Brightness alert. So this is Levels.fyi. They go to add salary. It redirects to Google form, and Google form puts the data into Google Sheet. Nice. Version 1 was our own UI with the necessary validations on the front end. Front end calls a publicly visible API gateway. API gateway triggers a spawns a Lambda function. Lambda function processes and appends the new salary to the sheet. Okay, this was the only extraction function, I guess. So this is the API gateway over here, and this is the Lambda, and ultimately we have a Google Sheet. Nice. Read flow. Our read flow were more complex than write ones. Since beyond just showing our salary data, We also had use cases where we would show charts like below. That is so nice. That is so nice. They have something like heat map or range based heat map where they have L3 band and the band spans into some range. That interesting. Elite. This is interesting. Is this an Amazon salary? I do highly feel. It roughly starts from 100. 100 should be here. 120 should be here. It starts from 120 to nearly to 210. 210 to 30. To 300 should be here. To 210. Okay, anyways, it roughly feels Amazon level salary or somewhere equivalent. Our recipe for building a read flow was as follows. Process data from the Google Sheet and create a JSON file. Nice. Nice. Wherever I see hacky stuff, I see this kind of things. JSON file and storing it, extracting it, and okay, let's see where it goes. Process data from Google Sheet and create a JSON file. Use AWS Lambda for processing and creating a new JSON files. Why are we using to? Upload JSON file on S3. Okay. Cache the JSON files using a CDN like AWS CloudFront. Interesting. So they don't want to process the JSON file again and again. That's nice, because I believe that step 2 would be huge computational process. And when I say computational, it also requires time. We don't want user to wait that long. So once that is done, upsert it into S3, and S3 is then cached till CloudFront. So okay, brightness alert. Yep. Levels.fyi, it fetches JSON, CDN, cache miss from the S3. Then it goes ahead and uses JSON chef lambda, build the JSON files, and it takes Google Sheet as a help. And this lambda, when took a help from Google Sheet, creates a JSON. JSON is then updated in S3, and then we don't have any cache miss, I guess. Okay. Oh, CDN itself is a cache. Okay, they are using CDN as well. CloudFront. Nice. I wonder what if S3 doesn't contain this thing. So if we have a CDN and CDN doesn't have queries S3 wouldn't give any data. In that sense, you won't have any data. Okay, your band would be empty in that sense. Maybe UI is responsible to handle that. That's cool. But till the moment Lambda is up and running, we are sure to get it from Google Sheet. On initial page load, the user's browser downloads all the needed JSON files, and any further processing happens in the browser. Yes, you are right that. Okay, the intuition was correct. In the first few years, Levels.fyi, every single salary over 100k at the same point. That is so interesting. In the first few years of Levels.fyi, every single salary over 100k at some points were downloaded in a single JSON. Nice. Imagine when you open your network manager tab. I wonder why it is downside. Let me pull it in right. Yep. And all you see. Okay. Is it me or the text is seeming wobbly? Let me close this one. Let me close this one quick. Okay. The browser was shaking. Anyways, cool. So imagine like I'm opening the network tab and getting the entire JSON file within my maybe application space or IndexedDB. I'm not sure where they are storing this one, but yeah, you're able to see that. And imagine if you're taking all these things up and running or pulling these data, then entire your below 100k salaries would be at your point. So that is quite interesting. So you can create your own startup or own company where you cater the customers having less than 100k because you have entire data of Levels.fyi. All the graph, statistics, calculations, etc. were done in the browser. That was so expected. We used the below caching strategy to reduce the data transfer for the user. Levels.fyi, salaries rotation, browser cache miss, then it's CDN, then cache miss, it goes to S3, and who is responsible to populate S3? It is the Lambda. Lambda takes a source of truth from JSON's Google Sheets. Okay, that's a good hacky solution. But it was still working. It was still working nonetheless. So what were the drawbacks? That's the good portion. The above architecture design worked well for 24 months, but as our users and data grew, we started running into issues. That is so true, because how much can you store within the browser cache? In the size of a JSON, files grew in the several MBs. Even cache misses were a massive penalty for the user and also for the initial page load time. Exactly, because the initial page load would be huge because you're not only considering your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but also this salaries.json, which is a real pain. Coming back, this is so true. Our Lambda functions started timing out due to the amount of data that needs to be processed in a single instance of execution. That's nice. Maybe I believe that you can have a strategy where you bifurcate salaries based on the range, like you did over here. L3, you would take the data, this, and every point you see it's a data over there. This data would be coming from Lambda 1, Lambda 2, or maybe I'm too much over optimizing this. Anyways, this was an issue which they were facing. We lacked any SQL based data analysis, which became a problematic to make a data driven decisions. That is so true. But I do believe that at the end of the day you can have a script, or that is a very rough way to narrate it, that you can take a Google Sheet, you can feed it into your own laptop, or it not need to be huge system because it's an analysis portion. You don't want it a real-time data to be data-driven decisions. So even the decisions come out after a few time, it's not a problem. Google Sheet API rate limiting is pretty strict with the write paths. That is so true. I have been there with API. I have not tried AppScript. Maybe that would be a good one for me. Our writes were scaling post those limits. Yeah, your users were very good. But that's very nice to see. Within 2 years, they ran into this problem. So the scaling was very good in this sense. Since our data was downloaded as JSON file, it was easy to be scraped and plagiarized. Nice. This finally they have called it out. Nice. Migration to a new backend. Let's see how do they do it. To migrate the drawbacks, we started migrating off the Google Sheet and AWS Lambda function to a database and an API server. Our migration goals were getting rid of all the JSON files. Nice. That was the bottleneck. I believe this one was a huge consideration when you say JSON files, and then you were considering S3 JSONs. And that makes sense because if you're not sending this, what's the point of storing this? Interesting. How do they handle this? Our migration goals were getting rid of a JSON files using API for all read and write paths. Okay. So the forms are out of the picture, and now I believe the JSON was also out of the picture. We are just okay. Let's see what we are doing. Duplicate writes. In order to not break our current functionality dependent on a Google Sheet and the JSON files, we started duplicating writes to existing Google Sheets and our new database. This allowed us to start migrating read use cases to APIs. Interesting. So these are duplicates. The same data which is going to database is going to Google Sheet. Interesting. Now, splitting JSON files. Started splitting the JSON files into smaller chunks and duplicating each chunk by a new read API. So they started with a chunk. This, I believe, was the earlier structure. And now when the reads came in, it went to CDN, then to load balancer, API server, and then it went from database. Now it is started to read from the database rather than S3, moving all the reads and write path to the API. Yeah, this is the one which we mentioned it over here. The earlier path was the above one. Nice. It is still the very shallow. I wish they could have given the more information about it, as how did the API server store this, and was API server responsible only to read this data and whatnot, because writes, they are just having a duplicate writes with Lambda, and this API server is just a dumb API server, or it's a Lambda function, or it's altogether a good EC2 instance which is saving their database cost and doing some optimizations over there, grouping this because grouping makes sense to them. They don't want it to store individual data. Maybe a range could be stored right from within 100 to 110k, 100k to 110k. They have this many amount of data. Anyways, I wish they could have given this data or information to us. Ultimately, for the conclusion, Google Forms and Sheet allows us to launch and test ideas in a rapid manner, rather than getting lost in setting up bits and pieces to our backend. This is so true. This is so true, and this aligns to the thought: iterate and fail fast. Where was the line? Where was the line? Iterate. Start simple and iterate. Yes, that's what I'm saying. After Levels.fyi achieved product market fit and our scale increased, it made sense to move to a more robust and scalable backend infrastructure. Our backend today is more sophisticated, but our philosophy to scaling is simple: avoid premature optimization. Says who? Even now, one of our most trafficked services today still has a single Node.js instance serving 60k requests per hour. That's interesting. Node.js is capable of this, but what is that? Most traffic service. Interesting. Ultimately, we have an engineering managers on a Google Sheet at Google. Wow, I'll share this with the team. That will make them proud. That sheet's got you folks. This point, don't worry. We won't hold it against you. That's your decision to move to something more robust for you. Okay. Some good words. Interesting. And this sparks the end of this article. I personally feel there are very good insights from this. One, to not get stuck by or stopped by any skill issues, or maybe just not pre-optimize this one. Just get it started. You don't want ACID compliant, you don't want anything. They just wanted to get a better market fit, and they did got it via a simple Google Sheets. That is so nice, and it would be so drastic if you pitch it in any meet that hey, we can use a Google Sheet in production, and that everyone would laugh away. It has its own pros and cons, but initially they were humble enough to admit that hey, they don't have any users, so why don't we do this? But yeah, now they have 1 to 2 million unique users per visit every month. That is so nice. That is so nice for them. If I calculate it in 1.5, 1 2 3 and 1 0. How many zeros? 1 2 3 4 5 6. And this is every month, right? So 50,000 users per day. If I further divide it by 24, it means 2,000 users per hour. Okay, so 2,000 people are visiting per hour to get job salaries. Nice. So humble beginning, a very lean start, till they scale. So that was it. Thank you.